When information that the media has been giving you is proven to be wrong or untrustworthy, news organizations have a choice to make. They can acknowledge that and say that information that they've been giving you was wrong and that they shouldn't have trusted the source of that information in the first place, really own it. Or they can technically correct themselves, but really bury it. So basically they mention somewhere that there's this new information and hope that you won't notice or remember how many times they've been telling you something that turned out not to be true. There's also option number 3. They can ignore the correction altogether and just quietly stop saying whatever they were saying before. That is put to the test all the time. And today I'm going to share with you a couple of examples from recent days in which some media failed that test. One is a viral video making fun of a guy who turned out to be in the right. In fact, he was unfairly sent to jail. And then a big story that the media is still getting wrong no matter how much the proof just piles up. This is the 10th episode of They Stand Corrected, and it's the first one devoted to answering multiple questions submitted by you. I was so interested to see the topic that the most listeners asked about. It involves death tolls from Gaza and whether news agencies are still, even now, trusting Hamas claims. In answering these questions, I'm going to tell you about why one report on these death numbers could make it harder for people to trust news about certain scientific issues like climate change and concussions among football players. That sounds so random, right? I know. I promise it'll make sense when we get to it. Plus, I've been asked about some news reports that say a study has found dads have worse heart health than men without kids. An important story that shouldn't be missed. I'll talk you through that. All of it is ahead today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Lebs. This is my podcast, Fact Checking the News. This is the 10th episode, and the first time that I'm going to be tackling a bunch of your questions. We are getting so many responses, and I'm so grateful to you. We're also getting 5-star ratings on big platforms like Apple and Spotify. Thank you so much. I encourage you to, if you have not yet, hit the little subscribe button that is probably showing on your phone on whatever app you use. With each episode, I send out a newsletter packed with links and images and more information. And a listener told me that for people who don't know about this tool called Substack, it can be confusing. So we have a new solution. To follow the newsletter, to see it, you can go straight to my website, joshlebs.com, JOSHLEVS.com, or just look in the show notes and you'll see a link to it. And those of you who use Substack, it's still there. We used an embedding system, so it's now inside my website as well. So you can find everything in your one-stop shop, joshlebs.com. You can also support the show in that way through the newsletter. It means so much when people do. You're the reason that we can keep going. So if you can become a paid subscriber, thank you. All right, enough business. Let's get into this. So many of you have been contacting me with questions, and I'm going to get to your biggest topic of interest in a minute. But first, a listener who has been so great to this podcast and is in this case choosing to remain anonymous, she sent me an example of something that she said speaks directly to what I've been talking about. All right, so there was this viral story about a man who allegedly had his license suspended and then did his court appearance via a video feed while driving. So you can hear the concept of that and you can instantly imagine why everyone thought it was so funny. He was sent to jail. And the woman who sent me this, she sent me a video from someone on TikTok who apparently does comedy, but also talked about this. His name is Jason K. Pargin, and here's part of what he said.
And it made every single news outlet in the United States. Judge stunned when man with suspended license joins court Zoom call while driving. What was he thinking?
He's right. That is how the story was being presented. And as he went on to point out, in fact, this guy in the news did not do anything wrong. This was in Detroit, and a local news station looked into it, and they found that his license was not suspended. There was some kind of clerical error, and he should not have been sent to jail. But there's one thing in particular about this story that I want to tell you about. It's from that local report from 7 News Detroit. They wrote that it took them less than 5 minutes to check court records and see that a judge had rescinded the order more than 2 years ago so his license could be reinstated. How many times on this show have I said it's so easy to fact check certain things? Sometimes it only takes seconds, but It's not a standard part of the news process. What this local station did is something that every news agency should do in a case like this. Editors do often make sure that you at least seek comment, so you're able to say, we have asked this person for comment. But what about when you can't reach that person? Do you wait or just say, we've sought comment and rush through the story? Very often they just rush through the story. Also, what if that person doesn't know what's going on and doesn't understand? Or what if they've been sent to jail and aren't available? It should be automatic for news agencies in cases like this to look for court records and confirm this stuff. There is nothing wrong with waiting 5 minutes before jumping on a bandwagon to try to be part of a viral story. But I know from my time inside newsrooms that often the pressure to jump on that bandwagon is so extreme. People rush their way through it, and they don't realize that that bandwagon is about to crash into a giant pile of truth. Whatever, mixed metaphor. Anyway, this man said that the reports have embarrassed him. That's why I'm choosing not to even use his name in this podcast in case that's something he might prefer. But in the newsletter, I will link to that local news story that I told you about. So that's bad. But what we'll look at next is not just worse, it's kind of the other end of the spectrum worse. I mean, nothing funny about this or resolved. This is something that the media keeps doing wrong and is fueling danger and violence and terrorism and hatred. It's also messing with governments everywhere because of propaganda. It's the number one thing that you have been asking me about. It involves death tolls from Gaza. Some of the questions I've received here say, is the New York Times still sourcing Hamas for Gaza death tolls? Is the AP still using Hamas for death tolls? Is it the United Nations or is it Hamas? This comes after a big change in the alleged death tolls from Gaza. I have explained on this show that the only numbers of alleged total casualties in Gaza come from Hamas. That is still the case. There's a commentator on Sky News Australia. His name is Chris Kenny, and he talked about this recent change on his show.
They're bandied about by protesters and the media, but the only numbers coming out of Gaza are numbers that Hamas allows out of Gaza. So they're always dodgy, and they shouldn't be parroted the way they are by protesters, by the media, by politicians, or by the United Nations. And just to demonstrate this exact point, the UN quietly has dramatically revised downwards its claims about the number of women and children killed in Gaza. Just a week ago, they were claiming that more than 9,500 women had been killed and more than 14,500 children. 2 days later, they reduced those numbers to less than 5,000 women and less than 8,000 children. Now, I hasten to add, if those numbers are true, they are horrible, a horrendous toll, a terrible loss because of a war Hamas has deliberately started and deliberately prolonged.
I wanted to share that clip with you because sometimes it's the commentators who are willing to say things as they are instead of the straight up news reporters who are often so worried about how they're going to come across that they're afraid to just hit the nail on the head and state it. Commentators can sometimes be right and sometimes be wrong. I can tell you that what he said there is true. The only numbers are from Hamas. Since someone specifically asked about the New York Times, I read a piece there on one specific battle. In their article, they said a group called Air Wars had independently confirmed and then a specific number of civilians killed in that battle. And that is a term that you might hear sometimes, independent confirmation. But the Times was wrong. In news, independently confirmed generally means that they themselves can take responsibility for that piece of information because they went and got it. This group, Air Wars, seems to be doing a good job of attempting to count numbers of civilians killed in wars all over the world. But I checked with them, and no, they do not use the word confirmation when it comes to a number. They're looking at different sources that describe civilian deaths, and their sources include Hamas, of course, because Hamas controls Gaza. And the United Nations, when they give figures, they cite Hamas. That's what they're going by. And as you heard, the UN did suddenly dramatically drop the number of women and children who have allegedly been killed in Gaza. But here's the problem. If you heard this and you went Googling for more information and you saw what the headlines say, you might think, oh, I must have heard wrong. No, they didn't cut the number. Because you'd see headlines like this. Here's one from CNN. Gaza death toll, UN says number of deaths remains unchanged after controversy. Or from NBC, The death toll in Gaza has not been revised down, the UN says. So you'd be confused. Which is it? And I'll tell you, I've seen trajectories like this happen many times. You hear that something happened, and you go to find out more, and you see headlines that say, no, that didn't happen. And that's usually the end of it. In fact, if it turns out that the original thing did happen, it can be really hard to fact check because people kind of tune out at that point. They're like, no, I heard it didn't happen, and they move on. In this case, there was a big change in the alleged death toll. And it was such a strong sign that these numbers are not trustworthy in the first place. Here's the deal. Hamas has different groups within it that go by different names. And no shock here, they give different numbers. To its credit, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, tried to explain what was going on. Here's a little clip from their report.
The UN was using data from the Hamas Government Media Office, or GMO. All of a sudden, on May 8th, it switched to using data from the Hamas-run Ministry of Health instead. So there's two different sources of data coming out of Gaza, and their numbers have been different.
So since this change really did happen, what were those headlines about that I just referred to, saying, no, the toll remains the same? Here's the deal. The United Nations, citing Hamas, says, well, the total number of people killed has stayed the same, but a lot of them have not yet been identified, so we can't actually say whether they're women, children, men, etc. When you hear that, if you're a journalist, the obvious question to ask at that point is, then why have you been sending out these daily reports claiming an exact number of women and children if you didn't actually know? Why were you distributing fake numbers at all? And I have not found any sign that anyone is even asking that. Meanwhile, Hamas is not offering any number of terrorists among the dead. And by the way, they do have female terrorists and terrorists under age 18. You can hear about that in previous episodes. Israel says about 13,000 terrorists have been killed. That's the only number that the media are being given, but you almost never even hear it mentioned. It should be in every news report. To his credit, Dan Abrams on News Nation talked about this issue.
But the media never cites the Israel numbers.
Right.
It's like the Israel numbers are always taken with a huge grain of salt. But the Hamas, because the Gaza Health Ministry sounds so official. The idea that the IDF is less trustworthy than Hamas is absurd.
Even Hamas itself is no longer claiming something that the media has been saying for months and sourcing that information to Hamas. I'll explain that. Plus, a listener asks me to tackle a report that claims the science is clear. I'll explain what that means for climate science and concussions, a topic I discussed with an NFL icon right after this. We're living in the attention economy, and everyone's clamoring to be heard. Can truth get attention? Yes, I believe it can, but it takes an effort from all of us. So, spread the word about this show. And whatever app you're using to listen to it, you should have a little share button there. Also, spread the word on social media. You can tag me. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, now known as X, @JoshLives. I'm also at LinkedIn, which is a great place for professional connections. I'd love to see you there. For months, the media have been describing casualties in Gaza like this. Here's CNN.
More than 25,000 Palestinians have been killed in the enclave since the war began. The vast majority of them women and children, according to the ministry.
Here's BBC.
30,000 plus Palestinians killed in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are women and children.
And NPR.
The vast majority are women and children.
Vast majority. Well, now even Hamas isn't saying that. In these new numbers that Hamas is claiming, it's now saying 52% are women and children. Before, Hamas was saying more than 70% of the casualties were women and children. Now they're suddenly saying 52%, which is not a vast majority. Not that we should even trust that number. But now, even the media doesn't have a justification for what it's been saying all this time. Do you think literally any of these news agencies will go back and say, actually, maybe we should not have been claiming the vast majority thing? No, they won't. Listener Susan Asher wrote me about this. She wrote that some of her friends have been pointing to a story from Time about this issue. And I've seen this as well. The headline uses a very concerning phrase. It says, the science is clear. Now, sometimes headlines don't accurately represent the story, but in this case it does. I looked at the story itself and it says, quote, "The science is extremely clear." And this is in trying to justify the Hamas data about deaths. This article has become a go-to for people who want to support and trust the Hamas numbers. This piece in Time is actually an opinion piece. So technically, it's not Time as a news organization saying this itself. You wouldn't know that from the headline or the URL, but if you scroll way down, then you see that it's a commentary. This commentary points to 2 studies, but both of them are beyond flawed. One of them I talked about before in episode 4. Short version here, some researchers just went and looked back at some previous wars between Israel and Hamas, and they found that later on, afterward, when other people were able to enter Gaza and try to gather their own information, the numbers that they came up with were close to what Hamas had claimed. Not the same, but close-ish. And I explained that that does not mean anything, because there have been times in the past when Hamas has tried to say, oh, look, Israel's trying but failing to kill our fighters. It was actively downplaying death numbers. Now they're actively playing up numbers and trying to say, look, it's killing all these civilians. Hamas has discovered that saying that is great for recruiting and getting money. Also, we know that Hamas keeps lying about all sorts of things. So what they've done in the past in that sense just isn't relevant. But this report in Time also talks about another study that I did not have time to mention before. This other study is weird and it takes explanation, and that's why I didn't have time for it in the past. Here's the deal. As you may have heard me explain in episode 8, in Gaza, there is a UN agency referred to as UNRWA. It's extremely problematic, but anyway, UNRWA reports the alleged deaths of its staff members. So there's this group of researchers who looked at the deaths reported by the United Nations of their staff members, and they said, well, let's just assume that the percentage of UN staff who are killed should be about the same as the percentage of the overall population in Gaza that's killed. And when the UN is reporting some more deaths, then so does Hamas. And when the numbers go down, the Hamas numbers do too. So let's just decide that, therefore, the numbers are right. If you find that weird, that's because it is. They didn't actually fact check any numbers. They just said, hey, let's just assume this correlation. One of the many problems with this, UNRWA staff are adults. But the overall numbers that Hamas has been claiming, they keep saying is disproportionately children. Why would there possibly be any kind of correlation between adult UNRWA staff killed and numbers of children killed? So the science is not clear. And it's very problematic to ever say that the science is clear when it isn't. This phrase, you see it sometimes, science is clear or science is settled. That is an opinion. You often hear it in terms of climate change. There's so much science backing up the idea of human activity contributing to climate change. It might be better if scientists instead say things like, the science is overwhelming, because that connotes that there's a very large amount of it and that it's greater than the science that questions something. Either way, that's an assessment. I, several years ago, for some work I was doing, had to read a bunch of reports about concussions in the NFL, and not just professional football, but in football in general. And I did find that the evidence seems to be very strong. And sometimes in the reports that I was reading, I would see that phrase, the science is clear. And by the way, it seems just obvious that getting a lot of concussions cannot possibly be good for a person. There are people who think the science there is clear. That is a view. And something that I got a chance to talk about with Ronnie Lott. I was hosting this event. Ronnie Lott is this very well-known icon of the NFL. He and his son, Ryan Neese, both won Super Bowls. So they both have Super Bowl rings. I'm just going to share with you really quickly, as a momentary diversion, a little clip of what Ronnie said. He was serving on the NFL's safety committee, and they heard from an expert.
And as he said, he goes, I think that for young people, those little hits do matter. And so, hearing that last week changes my mind about maybe kids shouldn't be out and playing at a certain age. So there are things that you're going to learn and continue to learn about the game and about how we should play the game the right way, especially for young people.
I'll post a whole video of that in the newsletter, which, as I mentioned, you can now see at my website. All right, tangent alert, now back to the point. Anyone saying that the science is clear about trusting Hamas figures, that's bad. because no one should be misusing the term "the science is clear." Because what about a time when the science is overwhelming? Then will people believe it? It's, I don't know, maybe a crying wolf type situation. All right. Outside of this, there is a whole other topic that I'm being asked about. And if you don't know my background or what I've been up to for several years, then this might seem out of left field. It involves whether dads have worse heart health, but also live longer lives. That's after this. Thank you, Nextiva, the platform powering more than 100,000 businesses and billions of conversations every year. Nextiva integrates all conversation channels and powers personalized experiences at scale throughout the entire customer journey. Say goodbye to siloed apps and say hello to the unified customer conversation solution. Learn more at nextiva.com. In recent days, some news agencies have been carrying a report that says men who have children have worse heart health. Here's a clip about it from KLAX TV.
The study, published in AJPM Focus, found that later in life, fathers have poorer heart health compared to non-fathers.
This is right in my wheelhouse. For years, I have been fact-checking reports about fatherhood, about modern dads. I wrote a whole book called All In that busts all kinds of myths. In fact, there's a dad facts section of my website at joshlebs.com. And I have explained that there are a lot of false reports about dads. This one, based on the published study, seems to be legit. It has a big sample size. That means it includes a lot of people, in this case, nearly 3,000 men. And they have different ethnic backgrounds and other differences, which is important. You want a representative broad swath of the U.S. population. This study is also what's called longitudinal, which is a fancy way of saying that they followed the same men over lots of years to keep gathering data about them and tracking changes in their lives. And among these thousands, they did find that men with kids had worse heart health, but also overall lived longer. You still can't say, well, now we know, the science is clear, dads have worse heart health. It doesn't work that way. A big study like this can point you to something as a possibility, and then you need lots more studies to see if the findings are repeated. Also, it's important to note, studies like this almost never provide reasons for why something is different. Researchers can only theorize. So there certainly are theories about this, and based on my own research, I can see how it's possible. A lot of dads experience a lot of stress. When you have a child that you're responsible for, or multiple children you're responsible for, there's a level of permanent worry that you live with. You might be losing sleep, and you have a lot of other things to take care of, and you might not be taking care of yourself as well as you should, as well as you could. When I was doing my book, I asked men how stretched out they feel on a scale from 1 to 10, and almost everyone said 10. A few said 8. And there's a bunch of studies that have shown that men gain weight when they become dads. No surprise there. You end up shoving junk food in your mouth sometimes. All of these things can contribute. And I'll post the study in the newsletters. You can see it if you want to. So why might they live longer? Well, again, there's only theories, but I can tell you what some possibilities are. A lot of guys start going to the doctor annually or every other year after they have kids, because they realize they want to be sure to stick around. So going to the doctor might not change how they handle their lives throughout the year in terms of the stress and the eating and all this stuff. They might still have more problems with heart health, but going to the doctor can help them catch other things. Also, they might be less inclined to take part in risky activities. They decide, I probably should hold back on some of these dangerous activities. So for that reason, they might live longer lives. These are possibilities, but the study does seem legit. And you can hear how I couched it. It's one study. It's not some big announcement that we now officially know whether dads have worse heart health or live longer. That's what this study found. Okay, that's it for today. I know a lot of you are sending in your questions and your comments. I'm going to do more episodes like this. It's been a lot of fun piecing through them. And I'm also in the future going to share sound clips from you when you send in your questions through audio. I'm setting up a new system for that, so you'll be able to send them in there. Lots of you want to know what you can do about the kinds of problems I share on this show, especially when you see media continuing to go by Hamas claims about Gaza. So here's what you can do. In my newsletter, I offer text that you can send to any news agency anytime you see them do this. I also, when I can, offer you some email addresses of people to send that to. But something even easier is that you can send links to me. I contact news agencies all the time, and I point out these examples that you, listeners, send to me. There's two ways to get them to me. One is in the newsletter. If you're a paid subscriber, you have a comment section there. Send it that way. Another one is that there's a form you can fill out through my website, and it takes you through the process of confirming your email. All this stuff is done to help keep out, haters and spammers so we can focus on truth. Coming up next week, how the mainstream media keeps misleading you about Al Jazeera, the secret truths that they try to keep hidden, and how we're all paying a price for that. So great to have you here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.
Hi, Josh. My name is Barbara, and I recently asked you to do some fact-checking on an episode Joy Reid of MSNBC did with Queen Rania of Jordan. Thank you so much for setting this record straight. It was incredibly helpful. And thank you for doing a two-parter. I hope that Joy will correct some of the things she got wrong and present the facts to her audience. I found it incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.